Welcome everyone to the Unboxing Careers Podcast, where we shed light on what different careers are really like so that you can choose a career you'll really love. Today we're diving into the digital journalism field with Editor-in-Chief Joe Keenan. But before we do, let's talk briefly about unboxing thoughtful gifts. At thoughtfulcollection.com, you can shop from a wide selection of curated products you can feel good about, helping you express friendship, gratitude, and love. The next time you need to, don't just gift, give thoughtfully at thoughtfulcollection.com.
Where do I go? How do I know what I should do? Unboxing career.
All right, I'd like to welcome to the show Joe Keenan, Editor-in-Chief at Napco Media. Joe, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent. I sometimes cross paths. My in-laws are Philadelphia Eagles fans, so we let the Eagles fans come on the show sometimes too. That's okay.
It's been a rough week for us Eagles fans.
Very much so. Yeah. So, Joe, let's start with this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what Napco Media does for the audience so they have a better understanding, and then follow it up with what an editor-in-chief does.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll start with an overview of Napco Media, as you noted. So we're a B2B media company, and we have kind of distinct groups within that cover different B2B industries. And I particularly work on the retail and travel group. So my team and I cover three different brands within that group. It's Total Retail, Women in Retail Leadership Circle, and then Women Leading Travel and Hospitality. So the Total Retail brand kind of was the originator there. Women in Retail spawned off of that. And then Women Leading Travel and Hospitality is our kind of our newest entry into our group. And that is about 3 years old or so now at this point. In terms of the role of an editor-in-chief, my job is to kind of handle content production, content management, really be the eyes and ears for anything that we're publishing and or producing at events. So that includes newsletters, obviously our website, the content that is published to each of those three brands' websites. We host live in-person events for all three of those brands. We also do virtual events. We do podcasts. We produce research. So all these different kind of content channels that we're engaging with our various audiences in. My job is to kind of ensure that we are producing quality content that our audience wants to consume, and not only wants to, but enjoys consuming as well.
Very good. Appreciate the background. So your specific area they're responsible for, is that something that you purposefully set to go into? Does that kind of change based on the company you're with, and like, hey, Joe, got this opportunity. You want to go into it? Can you walk us through or give us a little background about how you found your way into a specific concentration?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll take us back to the start. I was a journalism major in college, so many, many years ago. So I always kind of enjoyed writing and reading. I was an avid reader when I was younger, including books, newspapers. So I always kind of had that, and that kind of instilled in me through my parents, even my grandfather, who was a big reader. And so I kind of took after them in a little bit. And so I kind of knew I wanted to get into journalism. Now, did I know at that age that I was going to be covering retail and now travel and hospitality for a living? No, it's kind of funny. I joke. The last place I would want to spend my free time is a shopping mall, yet I cover retail for a living. So it's kind of an interesting paradox there.
I'm right there with you. It's the last place I want to be too.
Right. My wife, who is an avid shopper, would be, perfect. She's the exact opposite. If you give her an hour of free time, she's going to want to go shopping. So, but as I kind of got into the journalism space, I initially worked in newspapers, then was at another media company doing kind of copy editing work in more of a technical field. We worked with the U.S. Patent Office in Washington, D.C., so kind of reviewing patents and kind of really that technical research and writing. And then I joined Napco Media. It's been almost 17 years now, so it's been quite a run. And we've kind of morphed our industry focus over the years. We actually started, and when I started with Napco in June of 2007, I worked for a publication. We actually had print magazine. It was called Catalog Success. And, we were really just publishing the magazine and then a weekly newsletter. And then we obviously had a website, but it was still in its kind of early stages. And we've kind of evolved into a digital first media company. We don't even have a print magazine anymore. We started in the catalog space, and that kind of morphed into e-commerce, brick and mortar retail, and that kind of holistic look. And that's why, hence the name Total Retail. So that's kind of my story in terms of how I got into covering the retail space. Wasn't my initial focus, but I've come to quite enjoy covering retail, and I'm still rather newish to the travel and hospitality space, but I think there's a lot of similarities between the two in terms of the guest and customer experience. So I think it's kind of a natural bridge between those two different industries.
That's nice. And was the goal when you said you went to school for journalism? So was the goal initially to work for a newspaper? Was it just some sort of print? Like, did you have an interest in magazines? What was the initial kind of like pie in the sky thought before
Yeah,
or
pie in
behind
the
what you were going
sky
to do?
thought, if you would have asked me when I was, an 18-year-old going into college and starting as a journalism major, would have been to be a sports writer in some capacity.
Yep.
Whether that was newspaper, whether that was magazine. Sports Illustrated was huge back then in the late 90s.
Yeah.
So thinking about working for somebody like that, kind of an outlet. Really, when I was starting school in the late 90s, college, kind of the internet was just kind of in terms of the sports media site. So it really wasn't that like working for like a big sports media outlet. It was thinking about either print and newspapers, magazines were really kind of my initial focus. And the industry I was kind of drawn to was sports. I obviously didn't go in that direction, but that was kind of my initial first love, I guess, in terms of what I wanted to do. And that actually was my first job out of college. I worked for a kind of a regional newspaper as a sports reporter, covering some high school sports. So that kind of was my first start in the business.
Why'd you navigate out of sports?
That newspaper actually, like many others, kind of went under. So I was out of work and looking for something, and this opportunity came up at a publishing company. Reed Technology was the name of the company, the organization, and it felt it was a good fit in terms of copy editing skills, looking for a copywriter. And I had sort of that educational background, a little bit of that work experience. So it was kind of a necessity. I didn't leave sports on my own volition. It was kind of forced upon me. I found another path, and 20 years later, here I am.
Very good. And then I want to get into kind of what your day-to-day looks like, or week to week, I guess, probably better example here. But I kind of want to go through one, you never found your way back to sports, which a lot of us do that, right? We have this idea, we do something, you find this other avenue, and you're like, hey, I'm just going to keep doing this. You end up liking it or, following that. Was there ever any temptation to go, you know what? I love sports. I did it for a brief period of time. I'm doing this now. I could try to find the transition back, like a pivot over there. Did you ever have that inkling, or were you just pretty happy with what you were doing? You're like, all right, I'm going to go with it.
Yeah, it's a good question, Greg. I did have that kind of, it's always kind of been a pull at me for, and there have been opportunities where I have done some freelance stuff in the sports arena. So it's not completely been eliminated, but for now, I don't know, now that I think of where I'm at in my career and what I'm doing, I don't know that a full pivot is in the near future. Never say never, but for right now, I don't know that I'll ever kind of be that star sports journalist, and even thinking about writing books. And, that was something that I always thought about, could it happen? For sure. I just don't know right now that that's where I'm at.
Excellent. And then I mentioned you're an editor-in-chief, so you've got a team underneath you. Obviously, you're not going to get hired right out of college doing something like that, right? So you've got to work your way up. Can you walk us through a little bit about what it takes to become a position where you're an editor? But what's the typical job? And we can focus this on like a digital media company. A typical job for new people coming out of college. What should they kind of expect to do? Uh, and then kind of a progression from there, if you will. You can keep it high level if you want, but just give
Sure.
people an idea about, hey, realistically, what are they looking at when they graduate?
Right. Yeah. So usually a junior level hire will come in as sort of an associate editor if you're um, copy editor and or associate editor. So you kind of work in that field for a little bit, kind of work your way up to almost a managing editor position, senior editor, kind of just taking that as natural progressions, executive editor. This has kind of been my path, and then an editor in chief. And it's kind of been, it was always a few years at each stop, I'll say, in terms of role. Different, a lot of the skill sets is the same as it's just in terms of a little bit more responsibility, management of people coming into it. When I first started, I pretty much was working for a couple different people and was assigned work and just went about and did it and was kind of that was I had to just take care of myself, my own work. Now I'm thinking about not only other individuals on my team, but also three brands. So we're pretty complex in terms of that. So it's not just what I'm doing on a day to day basis, but it's what's the rest of my team doing. What do we got going on with each of the three brands that are under kind of my overview? So it's become more complex as I've risen and kind of progressed in my career. I would say, for those that are just getting started, it's kind of the basics of I can't stress enough the value in being kind of a studious reader, consuming content. I think that's how you learn. So that's something that I always kind of practiced in whatever I was doing. And then you become a little bit more of a subject matter expert. When I started, I didn't know anything about catalog business, and then I didn't know anything about the retail business. Now I've been
Yeah.
covering it for so many years that I consider myself to be pretty knowledgeable on the retail space. So you'll pick up expertise as you go. So that's kind of a little bit about my career progression and kind of how I got my start and where I'm at today.
Excellent. And let's walk through kind of, I'm going to go day to day. Let's talk about like a typical week for you. And I'm going to assume you're like most other people. There's no typical week, but kind of walk us through the most typical week you can. How many, like, are you in a lot of meetings? Are you just doing a lot of reading and editing? Are you more just, shoving papers around, make sure all the puzzle pieces fit? Can you walk us through what a week might look like for you?
Yeah, I'll say as I've progressed in my career and gained more sort of people management responsibility, meetings do increase. So a good portion of my week is spent in meetings in terms with the individual teams and thinking about that. We also, though, have a good part of my week is built. It can depend on a week to week basis. I mentioned a big part of our business is events. And that wasn't the case when I first started, but we are hosting events. So thinking about getting the right people to our events, getting the right speakers and content on stage at events. That could be writing up and making sure you have relevant session titles and descriptions that are going to engage the audiences that are coming to your event. So it could mean working on an event very heavily one week. Kind of the day to day, we have a newsletter that goes out Monday or Tuesday through Saturday. So that's a daily process. So we're working on that at daily. So it's a mix, I would say, of between meetings, thinking about what's the next event coming up, how are we planning for that, and then really the kind of the day-to-day editing and publishing of content that needs to happen on our websites to keep readers engaged. So that's kind of an overview of how my week maps out.
Does the work ever become monotonous, or is there enough moving pieces to always kind of keep it fresh? You might be doing the same things, but it's always something new and fresh.
I think you nailed it there, Greg,
Yeah.
in terms of doing the work might be exactly the same, but the content is different. You're talking about different subject matters. So it does add, that's the one thing I've learned about the retail industry is that, it's quickly evolving. There's a lot of different companies and, from different product categories and then interesting people within the industry. So, I really get, in terms of one thing I didn't mention on kind of a day to day is I host a podcast similar to this where I'll interview retail executives. I really enjoyed that opportunity to kind of get the chance to speak with some of the leaders in our space, get to pick their minds a little bit, learn about their businesses, learn about their careers. So I find that interesting, and no one company is the same as the other. So there's a lot of interesting differences, and I kind of I think that keeps it fresh for me in terms of a day to day to week basis.
Awesome. What's the name of the podcast?
Yeah, that's Total Retail Talks, and it is very similar one-to-one interviews. I host all different retail executives from companies across the industry. So yeah, they're about a half hour in length, and love our audience to check it out.
Awesome. I'll throw that in the show description so everyone curious about it, wants to check it out. Feel free to jump down there, check it out. Hey, Joe, what do you like? What do you like most about? I normally ask, what do you like most about your job? I'm going to expand this a little bit. Feel free to take either side. What do you like most about your job, or what do you like most about working for like a media company?
I'll start with what I like most about my job. I like providing content, whether it's in the written form of a published article on a website, whether it's a presentation on a stage at an in-person event, whether it's a research report that people download and get value from, providing content that our audience believes is valuable to them and worth their time. So I get, I'll give you an example. Last week we had our Total Retail Tech event in Charlotte, and we have an event, and it's a boutique kind of smaller size event, 100 retailers, kind of a hand-picked audience, and I'm responsible for getting speakers up on stage that those people want to hear from, that they're going to find interesting. So we got a lot of great feedback about the content that occurred at that event last week at Total Retail Tech. So I get satisfaction out of that I've played a part, myself and my team, in terms of getting people on stage that really delivered interesting, engaging content that our audience finds value in.
Awesome. And then on the flip side, what do you like least about your job? Like, if there's something you could just kick off the curb, what would that be?
That's a good question. I hadn't really given this one much thought. I probably would say there are some things in terms of manual processes that need to occur for events, whether it's list building. In fact, before I was working on this, I was working on building out a spreadsheet of attendees for another upcoming event. So, that can get a little bit where I've been in Excel all day building out a spreadsheet of people that I'd like to invite to our next event. Probably not the most fun part of my job, but I will say, there's a lot of satisfaction when you pull together something like that, and then you start doing your outreach and you get the right people in the room and you get to have that right connection. You do get to take some satisfaction that you played a role in making that happen.
Excellent. And I want to shift a little bit to specific advice for, we're going to go high school, college. You can lump them together if you need to. We don't need to separate them if the advice can be the same, but let's assume you have a high school student who either knows they want to go into journalism. Maybe they don't know, but they love to read, kind of like you did. Mm-hmm. I love reading. I love writing. What piece of advice might you offer to them to either go all in on the career, or kind of things they might do to help them figure out whether it is a career match for them?
Yeah. So I'll start, and you mentioned it, and I'll just reiterate. I think back to the sports analogy, if you're a baseball player, you're going to only become a better baseball player if you're practicing, right? It's kind of similar to as a journalist. You're only going to become a better writer if you're a reader and you're a writer and you're practicing your craft. So, get your hands on, whether it's a newspaper, whether, and that could be online, it's not the old days of necessarily of holding up a print newspaper in your hands, but reading stuff online, reading books, practicing writing, doing creative writing, doing research writing. You're going to get better at your craft as you practice. So that would be my first point. The other thing I would mention, and I did this when I was in college, is look for opportunities to be part of if you're in a college setting, even this applies to high school students as well, is get involved. If there's a magazine or a school newspaper or a school yearbook, that looks great, right? It can get you some valuable experience. It not only looks nice to a college admissions board. If you're on the school newspaper, it shows some level of initiative. And then at the college level, I would say the same. Get involved in the school newspaper. I was involved in writing sports for my school newspaper when I was in college. And then internships, right? I think that's the next step. As you get a little older, thinking about where you could potentially do an internship where you can get some valuable experience and get your byline published, right? That's going to be key in your job search, is having, and this is again back to kind of that school newspaper, is you get your byline published. And for a 20-year-old kid, that's important, right? As you're going out into your job search, here's some copy of the work that I've produced, and I can share with the hiring manager a whole portfolio of content that I've produced. So thinking about that, get involved, be a voracious reader, and practice, creative writing, different types of writing is kind of the points of advice I would give, Greg.
Wonderful. And anyone new coming out into the workforce, what do you think the most challenging thing they're going to face right from the get-go?
That's a great question. I would say in my particular world, in terms of the work that we're doing, is you might not get to be as creative in your writing as you would want to be. We are a B2B media organization, so we are very strictly writing about, for Total Retail and Women in Retail, we are writing about the retail industry. So there's not a whole lot of opportunity to freelance and talk about other different things. So you have to kind of learn the industry. It's going to take a little bit. Most people coming out of the college, if they're a journalism major, they don't have the retail background. We kind of train them on that and learn that, but it's going to take some time. So I would say that's the most challenging, is kind of learning your craft, especially in the B2B media space, where you're covering a particular sector. There's going to be a learning curve there in terms of, and it could be, you could be covering healthcare or education or whatever the case may be. Retail is just one industry. Prepare yourself to be learning on the go as you're covering whatever sector it is that you may be working on.
Do you think, like you said, and this has happened to me too, right? You might not have a strong interest in a particular topic or a subject or something like that, but a job's a job, and like most careers, you learn by doing most of the time versus just learning, typing, Googling how to do something. Would you advise someone, I think healthcare is a good example. Maybe I have zero interest in healthcare, right? I like whatever, retail. I'm new to the workforce. There's a healthcare opening for entry level editor or writer or whatever. Mm-hmm. Would you dissuade people generally from following something that they have no interest, or would you advise them, hey, go into it because you might actually like it a lot? You might not know anything about it. Maybe that's why you don't think you like it, but there's got to be a fine balance there, I've got to imagine, between, like, you could go into that and go, you know what, I actually do hate healthcare, right? So I don't know. It's a bad way to ask you a question, Joe, but like, is there a way to kind of balance or figure out, like, hey, maybe you could do it because you might like it, or are there certain red flags they look for and be like, hey, you know what, maybe you should avoid it if you hit these red flags? It's not a really good way to ask a question, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say.
I do. And what I would say is I'm of the mindset that give it a try. I wouldn't rule things out just because you don't think like I said, if you would have asked me 20 years ago, would I want to be covering retail, I would have said you're nuts. And now here I am, and I actually enjoy it. So I think there is, and it could have went the other way too, right, Greg? I could have gotten into it and said, you know what, this isn't for me, and and that's fine. And then 6 months into the job, you put your you put your name into the market and you go out looking for another opportunity. But you won't know until you try, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you may end up learning something and enjoying something that you didn't think you would. I'd also say, as you're thinking about that, reading and writing skills and editing skills are transferable, right? The subject matter is a little less important. I could be writing today about retail. Tomorrow, I could be writing about the travel industry. The next day, I could be writing something about leadership for our Women in Retail Leadership brand. So if I'm a good writer, I'm a good writer. It doesn't necessarily matter what I'm writing about. I have, that skill set. So thinking about it that way, that these skills are transferable to the subject matter is a good way to look at it.
Excellent. Great answer. Uh, we've gone through this with, you hear journalism's dead, right? Everything's always dead at some point. But journalism has gone through a seismic change over the last 15 years, right? Just evolution. I mean, you experienced it firsthand working in a newspaper. So even online media, online journalism, it's still evolving, right? We're seeing layoffs all the time, but there is also growing, like you're working in it, right? In online digital media where you have different facets and outlets and publications, stuff like that. So long way to ask you a question, Joe, but what are some, working in it, what are some common misconceptions about your industry right now?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if it's a misconception. I would say that digital is, I don't want to say not overhyped, but the personal kind of in-person relationships that we're able to create through events has been kind of eye-opening to me. When I started, we made our money through sale of print ads within a magazine, right? Some banner ad sales, some website stuff, but I'm going to stop for 1 sec because that's the train going by. I'm sorry. I had the window.
That's okay. Trains are allowed to go by.
I'll give it. It was blowing its horn. It was pretty loud. I didn't want it to distract.
Sure. I'm going to give a quick clap real quick. There you go. Because I'll forget that at this later.
Yeah. Yep. So as I think about where our industry has evolved a little bit, events is a great example. When I started print media, we were a print magazine, and we were making our money through the sale of print ads within that magazine. That was the lion's share of revenue coming in. We did have some website advertising, but that was really a small portion of the budget. Then it became the website was really the driving, revenue generator for the company. That's evolved even more so now to the event space. And we host a number of in-person events and virtual events for our audiences that have kind of really been able to connect people, specifically those in-person events where you're able to create relationships. So, to your point, there's been, every industry has always been kind of written off as being dead. The death of brick and mortar. If I've seen that headline once, I've seen it 500 times across mainstream media. Yet 80% of retail sales still occur in physical stores. So it's like, I don't know if it's dying yet. And that story's been written probably for the last 5 years, every year. So maybe that's a great example of something that's kind of specific to the retail space, but thinking about physical stores, and that really goes back to that in-person interaction that I think people still like to have, right? So that's, I guess, long-winded way of saying that don't just get locked into thinking about digital only. Think about other ways that you can interact with your audience. That's kind of been something that we've embraced at Napco Media, and it's been really important. As a traditional media company, you noted there's a lot of challenges out there, a lot of challenges. So we've had to kind of innovate in order to survive. You can't just stand still. You have to keep on thinking of different ways that you can provide value to your audience, because if not, there's a lot of competition out there, and you're not going to make it. So
excellent. You might have answered this already. I think you might have answered it twice, but I'm going to ask it anyways for you, Joe. So is there something about the industry you wish you knew a little bit sooner?
I don't know if I think there's anything that I wish I knew a little bit sooner. I will kind of think about that. I wish I had gotten an opportunity to meet some more of the people the leaders in the organization a little sooner. I think that's really accelerated my learning curve. When I started, I basically was a desk editor. I was reviewing copy. It was written by somebody else. I wasn't really interviewing many people. So I didn't really get the opportunity to speak with leaders in the space. I was kind of just, you know, for lack of a, making sure commas were in the right place. And then if word was hyphenated, should it have been hyphenated? And, was everything spelled correctly? And, so I didn't really get to absorb sort of that knowledge from others that were kind of leaders in the space. That is, so thinking back, I wish I had gotten to do that sooner because I think it would have made me more effective at my job. So I guess that's kind of my one thing I wish I would have known sooner is that it took a little bit longer. And I think, to your point, I answered this earlier. It took me a little bit of a learning curve to learn about retail because I didn't know anything about it when I started.
So if you went back and did it over again, what do you think your process would be? Modern day technology, right? Would you just send them an email and be like, hey, I'm Joe. This is who I work for. Do you have 15 minutes? Like, what would you do? What precisely would you have done differently?
I think that's a good example in terms of just reaching out. I'm trying to think when I first started, if LinkedIn was a big enough platform where I think it was like creating connections there through different ways and being like, hey, I'd love to just talk to you about your, to what we're doing right now. Talk to me about your job so I can learn a little bit more. I'm in this new position. So kind of that always willing to be learning is a great piece of advice. You asked about advice that I might give. That's another one is that you're never going to be the you never should stop learning. There's something new that you can learn every day. So trying to be proactive in terms of your connection building, networking. I think too, when I first started in a job, I probably was a little reticent because I didn't feel like I belonged, right? Like I was like, these people are retail experts. They know the ins and outs of running a retail business. I'm this kid. I don't know anything about retail. I don't even belong in the same conversation with them. So it makes you a little pull back a little bit, right? Like I wasn't as willing to engage and be part of the conversation. Now that I've been in this space and I've learned about it, I love to sit at a table and talk about a different retailer's business and be with, multiple people. Total Retail Tech last week is a great example of that. We got to sit around and talk about different retail challenges and how they're impacting different businesses. When I first started, I would have been in the corner and kind of, not engaging in that. Now I've learned and I'm much more willing of a participant.
Excellent. Well, they might have thought you were the smartest person in the room because they always say the smartest person in the room is the quietest one. So to your point, Joe, I'll tell a really quick story here. So years ago, when I first got into where I knew I was going to be doing a lot of public speaking at events and things like this, I had experience doing it, but now it was my full-time job. And I went on Twitter and I reached out to someone who was a full-time speaker, B2B influencer, didn't know him from Adam, and wrote back to me right away. He's like, hey, I'm going to be in Raleigh on Friday. Why don't you come meet us? So I'm like, all right. So I drive out to the restaurant / bar, and there's a group of them. There's like 10 people there, right? And I am by far the least wealthy person of this entire, it's like a power circle. And then there's like me hanging around there. But to your point, I just reached out and I was introduced to a local guy here at Raleigh who we've befriended each other. We go to dinner every now and then. We touch base. So it's one of those small things, like you said. I was nervous to do it. I felt completely out of my realm, like I wasn't good enough, and it got back to me right away. And sometimes you got to do it, right?
And I think
you get benefits from it.
Yeah, and I think the follow up on that, Greg, is that I think people that are listening to this, especially younger people that are getting into a field, they'd be surprised how willing people are to help. They might be thinking, oh, they're never going to say yes. Like, no, they're not going to help me. I think you'd be very surprised at the amount of people that are willing to be kind of mentors and help others, specifically if they've shown an interest. Like, you want to be a journalist and I'm willing to help. And there's people that have helped me during my career. So don't be afraid to ask for help because I think it could be a good springboard. And your story is a great example of that.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. All right, Joe. So as we start to wind down here a little bit, what's the most rewarding part of your career?
I think getting to know the people that I've worked with over the years. I've created great relationships. There's a number of us on our team that have been with the organization a long time. Our leadership group has been at Napco Media for a long time. I've created great relationships there. So not just coworkers over the years, but I really consider many of the people that I've worked with over the years to be friends. So I would say that's kind of been the most rewarding. It's not necessarily a work answer. It's kind of an offshoot of work, is that I've created some real friendships over the year.
I think it's perfect though. So it doesn't always have to be about work, right? It's all those ancillary things that the story I just told, right? That's
Yep.
not work related anymore, right? It's personal. So, so Joe, I can't cover everything. Something maybe I neglected to ask you that you feel is really important for the audience to know. Anything?
No, I mean, I think my advice, and we talked about this, for those that are aspiring to get into kind of the media business, is to follow your passion. Don't limit yourself, right? So, I'm going to go back to, I wouldn't have thought I would have gotten into the B2B media space and me covering retail specifically. It's grown on me. I've come to love it. So I would say, give it a shot, follow your passions, and see where the chips may fall. But it's certainly worked out for me, which I'm happy to talk to.
Awesome. And then Joe, you can't be a writer anymore. Nothing of that. You've got to choose a different career. What do you think you would choose and why?
Something in the world of sports.
Okay.
I would think maybe a coach. I have young children, and I've coached some of their sporting teams over the years, whether it be baseball, basketball, soccer, and I really enjoy kind of the opportunity to teach young people. And so probably a coach, maybe even at like a high school level or a college level. I think it's rewarding when you see kids kind of grow both in the sport, and you get to know them personally. I think I get a great enjoyment out of that. So that will be something in the sports arena,
Awesome.
maybe coaching.
Excellent. So Joe, it's a pleasure having you today. If someone has a question for you, wants to ask you something about journalism, reach out. What's the best way for someone to get a hold of you?
Yeah, I'm happy to help. My email address is probably the best way to get me, and that is just the first initial of my first name, so J, and then my last name, which you'll see here, KEENAN at napco.com. So feel free to shoot me a note. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me, and happy to lend any insight that I can.
Awesome. We'll probably hash that in the description, but check out the website. We'll just do a static link to it there for you, so you don't get spammed too much by scrapers. So Joe Keenan, everyone, editor-in-chief at Napco Media. To find out more about Joe, check out that description. Hope you learned something in today's episode. If check out our website to find out more careers, and if you want to unbox yours with us, please just reach out to us, let us know. And until next time, be kind to one another.
Unboxing careers.